Hey everybody, it's Vanessa, the Crafty Gemini, and welcome to episode number 75 of WIP Wednesday. So today I'm going to be answering some of your pre-submitted questions. Those of you that are on our email newsletter list have already been made aware of the changes to the WIP Wednesday shows that we've been doing for the past couple of years. And so now I'm answering questions, sharing my tips and tricks and answering these pre-submitted questions on these weekly live shows that are now taking place on Wednesdays at 7 p.m. Eastern, which is 6 p.m. Central Time. Okay, so thanks for everybody who has tuned in. I see the chat is pretty active already, so I'll pop in and say hi to some friends. Hey, Alex, tuning in from Florida. That's a neighbor. Hi, Marilyn from Melbourne, Florida. That's another neighbor. Heather's tuning in from California. Hey, Heather, glad you can make it. Pam from Maine and Christine from North Carolina. Hi, everybody. So I hope that y'all can see me and hear me. Let me know where you are tuning in from in the chat box below. I'm coming to y'all from my home crafting studio here. We live in North Central Florida, in rural part of Florida, like Amanda. She says, hi from Middleburg, Florida. That's not far from here. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and get started. Hi, Parlene. Parlene says, I'm finally watching a live show. Happy. Well, we're happy that you're here too. Great. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started. The first question I have was submitted by Patty. And Patty says, I want to sew mesh fabric to vinyl. Each has a different suggested stitch length, so what would work best? This is actually a great question. So y'all are getting this aerial shot already. And what I have here is a piece of faux leather. It's not exactly vinyl. And of course, if you're working with clear vinyl, it comes in different thicknesses. It's referred to as the gauge. And the lower the gauge, the thinner the clear vinyl, the higher the gauge, the thicker it is. So I usually use something in like 12. What do I use? I mean, I use all of them. I use like 8 gauge, 12 gauge, 14, 16 gauge for different projects. But vinyl, some people also call things like faux leather. You might find some pliable vinyl that you're buying from a vendor online. It might be something like a cork fabric, with which different textiles similar to cork fabric are often referred to as vinyl or faux leathers and stuff like that. So what I'm going to show y'all here is what I had on hand. And to Patty, if she's tuning in or she's catching this as a replay, who submitted this question, it's going to depend on what the construction steps are to connect that mesh fabric to that vinyl. So what I have pulled here is what I'm thinking is maybe the situation that you have, it may be different than this, but that way I can just show and share kind of what I would do in this situation. So what I have is a piece of mesh fabric. And for those of you that are not familiar with our online website, we carry the By Annie's lightweight mesh fabric. I think we just restocked it last week or the week before. We have, I don't know, like 14 different colors. So if you're looking for mesh fabric, and each package is really affordable, it's like $6, and the cut is 18 inches, so half of a yard by 54 inches long. So if you've been tuning into my free tutorials or you've signed up for some of my online courses and workshops, we use mesh fabric a lot. I have a lot of free video tutorials that you can find on my YouTube channel. If you do a quick search on YouTube for Crafty Gemini and type in mesh fabric, whatever videos, whatever little projects I've made that feature the mesh will pop up for you there, okay? So this is the mesh fabric that I'm working with here. And so I'll talk a little bit about it for maybe some of you that are not familiar with it. Obviously, it has holes in it, okay? So if I stretch this, the fabric can stretch a little bit more in one direction, similar to cotton fabric. You know how we have crosswise grain and then we have lengthwise grain? So it kind of, I align the little holes in the mesh going vertically, I can stretch side to side quite a bit. Which this is important to note, because if you're using this for a side pocket or a water bottle pocket or something like that, where you want something to push on the fabric without stressing out the seams and still allow the fabric to stretch on you, then you'll want to keep that in mind, right, when you're orienting the piece in the construction step, and as well when you're cutting it, because you want to cut out the dimensions correctly so that the stretch is going in the right way, okay? Whereas if I pull on them as they're going vertically, right there, the little openings in the mesh, then it stretches a little bit, but nowhere near as much as this, okay? So just a couple things to keep in mind. Now, when it comes to stitch length, which is what Patty's asking about here with her question, I like to go with a shorter straight stitch length with the mesh. And the main and most obvious reason for that is the fabric has holes in it, right? So if we use really long stitches, we're not likely to grab the little bit of fabric that's in between these holes enough to make a secure seam in our project. Does that make sense? So if you shorten the stitch length, the stitch is going to be shorter, meaning you're going to be grabbing more fabric as you stitch across the openings. Okay, so remember that. Then on the faux leather or the vinyls, the cork fabric and things like that, I often recommend you lengthen the stitch length. Okay, the reason for that is that these fabrics are a little bit thicker. And sometimes your sewing machine can get hung up, especially if you're sewing through multiple layers of this, because you're adding bulk with each additional layer. And so if the stitch length is too short, the machine, you may find that just it stitches up and down and doesn't feed. So in that case, I always tell my students to lengthen the stitch length so that you allow the machine to pull a little bit more of that fabric through before it sinks the needle back down to create the next stitch. Okay, so Patty's question was, I want to sew the mesh to the vinyl, and each has a suggested, different suggested stitch length, like I just went over with y'all, okay? Now, these are faux leather sheets that we sell in assorted bundles in our online shop too. I have several different little mini pouch projects that we've done over the years. Again, you can type in on YouTube, TheCraftyGemini, faux leather, and all the projects will pop up. And if you get one of the bundles, I usually have in the product description page on the site, links to the tutorials that feature those faux leather sheets, okay? So let's assume that Patty is asking what stitch length she's going to use to attach, say, this little chunk of mesh that I've just hemmed the top over real quick, just to kind of like make a pretend demo here that she's wanting to create some type of pocket on a project that features faux leather or the vinyl, as she mentioned in there. Well, because in this case, if I'm stitching a mesh pocket onto a faux vinyl or a leather, I'm going to be stitching like this, right? The mesh needs to be attached to the faux leather or the vinyl. So what did I just say about sewing the mesh into place? Because I have so many holes, I want to shorten that stitch length, right? But we also said that when we're sewing with the faux leather or the vinyl, the cork fabric, stuff like that, it's thicker, so we usually want to lengthen it. Well, the solution is going to be to find a happy medium between the two, okay? So for me, if this was the pocket that I wanted to sew right here, what I would do is start off with a short enough stitch length that I know is going to give me enough grab on the sides of the mesh fabric, okay? But if I see that the machine for any reason is getting hung up because of the additional bulk of the vinyl or the faux leather, then I'm going to eke it up and just lengthen it a hair until I see that the machine no longer gives me any issues, okay? So let's try it out. Okay. So, and I'm including the screen here so y'all can see what I'm going to be doing and adjusting the stitch length, okay? Whether you have a mechanical or a computerized sewing machine, it doesn't matter. Just read your manual to see what all, what knobs you need to turn, what buttons you need to press to change it. So for me, the stitch length is adjusted here. If I turn my sewing machine on and off, it defaults to a stitch length of 2.2, which is quite small. That's going to be a solid construction stitch. And I know that this machine, because it's a little workhorse, will probably be able to sew through that easily, okay? But let's say I started here and I'm sewing this at 1/4 inch seam allowance. That means I also need to move my needle position over. Say I sink the needle down. I'm following the edge of my fabrics, both of them, in line here with the edge of my presser foot. And say I start stitching. I go back stitch to secure that edge. And you can see already, like I just told you, I know that this machine at a 2.2 stitch length is not going to have any issues. But if you were at home and you were doing this and you notice that, hey, it's kind of hanging up a little bit, like it wants more fabric to be pushed through, then you would go here to the stitch length and bump it up, make it a little bit longer. But if you have a solid sewing machine that's in good working condition, I would say even start at 2mm stitch length to sew this mesh fabric to a faux leather or a vinyl, okay? I'm going to pivot across the bottom. I'm going to keep sewing. Now remember we talked a little bit about the stretch and the grain line of the faux leather fabric, okay? When you start stitching across, If it's oriented in the way that it's the stretchiest dimension, you want to be super duper careful to not be stretching that mesh as you're stitching it into place. Because if you do that, you're going to end up with way more fabric sticking out beyond the edge here. Okay, so be careful. Huh? Me, I'm not. Yeah, because the camera's a little bit further that way. That's all right. Now I'm going to do something a little bit different here with the last seam so that y'all can see. If I went to pivot here, and instead of using the same short stitch length that we've been talking about, it was instead a longer one, say like 3.5, you'll see. And I'm going to back stitch here too, just to pretend that that's what we were doing, basting a little mesh pocket to some piece of faux leather or vinyl, okay? So here I had a super short stitch length. Here we went short, and here we went a little bit longer, okay? If I try to pull on the mesh here, it's not coming apart. And this mesh is great quality. It's not just gonna like shred and rip on you either. So I use it actually for pockets. And actually, I have this mesh tote here. This is one of my online classes, and it's just stuffed full of other smaller projects of mine. And you can see that you can put stuff in it. And so there's no other additional reinforcement at the bottom here, like no additional fabric panel. And you can see that I put yarn, balls, different skeins when I'm sorting things out. You can use it as a swim bag and things like that. And this was one of the bonuses in the last mini bag club too, I believe. It's like a mesh drawstring. If you do a search for that under our PDF workshops, you can find that there. But see, the entire bottom part of this is the same mesh that we're talking about here, okay? So then we have little here, little, and then we have 3.5 here. You can see that 3.5, it's still not just coming apart, but by looking at it closely, I can see, and I'm going to try and give y'all a close-up of this. You can kind of see that the length of the stitch, ooh, let's try it there. Okay, the length of the stitch is so long that it's basically like straddling. It like skips over the mesh fabric a little bit, then goes right in the opening of the mesh. Then it skips over the next one and goes into the opening of the mesh. And so it's grabbing just by skipping over it into the openings of that mesh fabric, okay? So at this step, if you were just doing that to baste it, I would say you'd probably even be okay with that, because basting it down here to a piece of faux leather or vinyl or whatever, obviously this would not be the finished project. So another thing to keep in mind is that if the mesh is going to be sandwiched in between lots of different seams, I would not even worry too much about the stitch length, because if I know that, say, another piece of fabric was going to get sewn here and then flipped right side out or something, that means that to get the next piece of fabric on here, I'm going to do another line of stitching, right? So although you may not have a super short stitch length to secure it in place, multiple seams are going to help secure it further. Does that make sense? All right. So hopefully that helps. It's important to think a little bit more about the steps that are going to be involved, because if you're going to have multiple seams, then don't worry too much about the stitch length. But if you're attaching the mesh fabric to the vinyl in the last step of where it's like basically done, then that's where you want to think a little bit more and make sure that you're going shorter so that you grab more mesh fabric. Okay? Let me pop into the chat real quick before I move on to the next question. All right. Oh, Jackie says, I love my Juki. Jackie says, I love my Juki. Awesome. The pens? Oh, about the clips. Let me see. Okay, Juanita is asking, hi from Independence, Missouri. Hi. My question for you, what kind of clips are those that you're using instead of stick pins? I really like those. Thank you for your instructional videos. I learned something every time I see them, even after sewing for over 50 years. I love to hear it. Thank you for tuning in, Juanita. These are called plastic sewing clips. A lot of different companies make them, and we use them a lot. I have a whole bundle here. They come in different sizes. These are the big Clover ones. They're called Wonder Clips if you're buying the ones that are made by Clover. But they're just great because if we're sewing through things like this, cork, faux leather, vinyl, you can't poke a pin through it for a couple of reasons. One, if you poke a hole through this, you're going to see the hole. It's not like a cotton fabric where it's just going to like close itself back up because it's a woven fabric. On something like this or vinyl or cork fabric, you're going to see the hole that you pierce with the pin, and also you're going to need some really heavy duty pins anyways to pin through thicker fabric. So it just makes sense to use these plastic clips. They work really great to hold multiple layers, thick stuff. When we start getting into like using foam stabilizer and interfacings and stuff, it helps keep things stable without making holes in it. So yeah. Okay. ATL lady says, don't you worry that you'll perforate the vinyl. So I've heard that sometimes, but I think if the vinyl is thick enough, if it's a thick enough gauge vinyl, you don't really have that issue, especially if the vinyl is going to be inserted in between fabric layers. Oftentimes I make pouches. Let me grab one real quick just to kind of give you a visual for those of you that are thinking about working with clear vinyl and kind of want to see how it works too. I have a couple project bags right here that I'm grabbing. These are my dual zipper project bags, and this is an example where we use clear vinyl. And it's sandwiched in here, and then we've bound, this is super old, we've bound the edges just like a little quilt, and then it has a zippered pocket in the back. I have it for yarn and some cable needles and some of my knitting needles and stuff like that. But you can see the clear vinyl stuck in here. It's all stitched in. It's not that it's perforating it. If you're using a thicker and good quality vinyl, I don't worry much about that at all, actually. And I've used vinyl in a ton of different projects. Okay. Let's see. Oh, great. Thanks, Maureen. She says, always such great info. Good. I'm glad to help. All right, let's move on to the next question. The next question is from Barb. And Barb says, just wondering, why can't you include the selvage in your project? So this is a great question. So first, let's talk about what is a selvage. So I have a chunk here of a fabric that I actually designed ages ago when I designed fabric for Timeless Treasures Fabrics. And the selvage, I had this right here on my table, and I thought this will be easier to show because you can see the difference between the print of the fabric design and this white edge along the bottom. So this bit, and if you've ever bought fabric, you've seen this, unless you've only ever bought, chopped up pre-cuts or something. But you'll have seen this if you bought yardage, okay? This is the self-finished edge of the fabric, right? Our cotton fabric that we typically use for, home projects or quilting is a woven fabric, meaning you have threads going this way and you have threads going this way, okay? And so as you can see on this cut edge, everything is fraying. They can't really sell fabric like this if this edge was fraying as well. It would be a nightmare. Can you imagine? So we minimize it by rolling out fabric from a bolt. The selvage edges are finished, okay? Those are the super tightly woven finished edges on the fabric. And then you only have the raw edge where whoever's selling it to you is cutting it, okay? So this is the selvage edge. So to answer Barb's question, it's not that you can't use the selvage in your project. There's actually a ton of selvage only projects out there that are super cool, where a lot of quilters specifically, I think from the ones that I've seen, they trim the selvages off from all the fabric collections that they've used over the years, quilts that they've made with the fabrics, and they'll make even skirts, garments, wild bags, pouches, and everything just made from selvages. So they kind of collect them, and then it serves as a little memento of like all the fabric collections that you've used over the years, okay? So you can use it. The reason we don't use it in a project necessarily, like if I'm telling you cut out 3 squares of this and 2 rectangles and you're making it, is one, because it's a different weave than the actual fabric. So depending on where this will land in your project, you may have some issues with the fabric wanting to kind of lie flat, and then this edge won't, because this is being stretched a little bit since it's more loosely woven, whereas the selvage is super tightly woven. And one specific example that I'll talk about is if you've ever taken your quilt to a long armor to be long arm quilted. If you're working with regular width of fabric, 40 to 45 inch wide, typical designer quality quilting cottons, you'll have to piece large chunks of yardage of the fabric together to create the full backing, okay? And sometimes people think, well, I'm just gonna sew it together along the selvage edge. Well, you run into a serious problem when you are rolling the the rolling bars on the frame for the long arm machine, and you get to a point where like the fabric is stretching and smoothing out nicely, and you see all these puckers going down the middle where the selvage is, because there's no give in it like there is in the fabric. So when I used to, ages ago, 13 years ago, when I used to long arm quilt for customers, I would always cut off the selvage first, then go in and piece the two pieces of fabric together minus that selvage, so I wouldn't have that issue. And that is because of the weave, it's different, okay? But if you're making a fun project or a bag and you want to feature, you know, the name of the designer, the collection, whatever, you can feel free to put it in there, okay? But that's kind of why we trim it off, because we don't want it interfering with what the hand of the rest of the fabrics are that we're using, okay? But I also wanted to take this moment to tell y'all a little bit about how you can use your selvage. The selvage is going to typically, depending on the manufacturer and who it's from or whatever, it will have the designer's name, the manufacturing company, any data there like the number, the code information for that specific collection and that print as a part of that collection. But here is my favorite part. It will have some little icons on the end. Sometimes they're circles, triangles, squares, but in more recent years, they got a lot more fun. As you can see, I requested that mine be a pilon. How you say that in English? Pilon. You know what I'm talking about? The pilon where you mash the garlic. The what? Y'all know what I'm talking about. Anyways, that shape has the color inside, and the colors signify what colors are included in the print of the fabric, which is so fun. Next time you pull out some yardage fabric from your stash, have a look at what the colors are that are included in the print, and 9 times out of 10, you're gonna be like, I had no idea all those colors were in there. So you can see this print, it looks like there's a light color and then the darker coral color here, but you can see by what's printed on here, there's actually 3 colors. The brighter coral, the paler kind of pink, and there's even a paler one, because the background behind the little motifs is actually very faintly striped. And so this is key in helping you decide what other fabrics to use to match up with the prints that you're using. So it's a great way to use, especially if you're not someone who buys an entire collection and you're buying 20 prints that all go beautifully together. If you're kind of piecing together stuff from your stash, have a look at the selvage and see, oh, that turquoise color is very similar to the one in this one. I can combine these two and put them together in your project, okay? So use that as a guide as well if you're pulling stuff from your selvage. And I pulled a bolt here, this witchy fabric, just to show y'all. Let me zoom back out. This is a great example of what I was just talking about. If we look at this print, you see this super cute witch. She has black cats and crows and all this stuff. And if I were to ask you what colors are in this, I mean, if you asked me, I'd tell you black, white, and gray. Okay? But if we have a look at the selvage dots, and this is a collection from Timeless Treasures again, it's called Wicked. Look at, there are 11 colors, y'all. So do you see that? 1, 2, 3, all the way up to 11. It's like 2 different shades of black on each end. There's like a super dark teal, a lighter super dark teal, a little bit lighter teal, a lighter one, a light more grayish blue. I mean, so if you were looking for a solid or something else to coordinate with this, you know, oftentimes we're thinking, what color binding should I do with this? And I don't just want to get a plain color. Look at the selvage of the fabrics that you use so that it can help you match up, especially if you're just needing to choose a solid. You can take that little strip of selvage with you to the store and pull the fabrics right next to it to help you match it up. Okay? Yes. Oh, Trina says mortar and pestle. There you go. Un pilon. Thanks for helping me with my English. Okay. So, yes, Brampton Gardner says, I keep the selvage bits in my purse if I'm looking for coordinating fabric. Great, great tip for sure. All right. So I hope that answered your question, Barb, and shared a couple more tips there on how y'all can use the selvages from your fabrics without just cutting them off and throwing them away. All right, next question is from Vicky. So Vicky says, I use the Juki LB5020 machine, like me. This is the one that we sell, and I think we just sold out today. So as soon as we get them back in stock, we'll let y'all know. They go super, super quick. Because this little machine, it's super affordable, and it's a great workhorse. All right, Vicky says, my question is about needle positions. I know you set the needle at 5.0 for 1/4 of an inch seam, which y'all saw me do earlier when I said, hey, we're gonna do 1/4 inch seam. I bumped the stitch width setting to 5.0, and that moves my needle position a little bit over to the right from the center. And then I know that if I still follow the edge of that presser foot that I still have on, the regular universal foot, it's gonna put me at exactly 1/4 of an inch. So that's, I scoot the needle over so I don't have to change out to specialty feet for like a 1/4 inch foot, okay? So then she goes on to say, what is the needle position for 3/8 of an inch and 1/2 of an inch seam allowances? So this is great. So the number one tip, and this it doesn't really matter if you are using the same machine or not. And I'm looking for my fabric bits. Here they are. Nope, that's not it. Maybe I moved it out the way with this bolt. Nope. With this, nope. With this is what happens. The bigger the table, the quicker you lose your pieces. Huh. Let me see. And that's not good because I literally have pins on it. Where are you? There it is, underneath all the vinyl. Got it. Okay, so this is going to be answering your question, Vicky, but also helping some of y'all so that you too can take some notes down on your machine, okay? Every machine is going to be different. A lot might be the same, but you'll have to change things up. And I think I talked about this last time we were on here. I was saying that I had a machine. It was a Brother Project runway machine years and years ago. And when you turned on the machine, the default setting for the needle was to like a far left position because it set you up for garment sewing. Since it was a Project Runway model, it was designed for people who wanted to make clothes. And you know that when you buy the typical big 4, big 5 patterns these days, you know, the Simplicity, McCall's and stuff, those usually will call for a 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. So it defaulted to that setting. So you might have a machine like that too. You'll want to check your user manual and make sure, okay, so that then you know which direction you need to change that needle position to get the seam allowance you want for a new project, okay? So on this machine, remember we turn it off and then turn it back on. It's going to pull up the default settings. Now the default settings here, you see that the stitch width is at 3.5. Because the stitch I've selected is the 0, 0 stitch, which is a straight stitch with the needle running straight down the middle, and I can see that here. You'll find all this information, of course, on your user manual or on the front of your machine if you have a machine with decorative stitches, all right? The needle's in the center. I have already checked before because this is something that I recommend you do no matter what machine you have. I have sewn without changing any settings on the machine and then measured it and saw, oh, when I have the needle in the center position, it's a 3/8 inch seam allowance, okay? So for you, Vicky, if you leave it at the default setting and you stitch, it's gonna be 3/8 of an inch. So 3/8 of an inch is right down the middle at the default center position, okay? Now, those of us that have this machine are also lucky because we have lines down here. Now, keep in mind that these lines with the measurements are if you have the needle in the default center position, okay? So if you leave the needle in the middle and then you look here where it says 1/2 of an inch and underneath it, it has it in metric, if you just align your fabric right there on 1/2 of an inch and you leave the needle in the center position, that's going to be a 1/2 of an inch seam allowance. So in that case, because a 1/2 of an inch is bigger, right? It's twice as wide as a 1/4 of an inch seam allowance, you wouldn't even have to move the needle position. Instead, just follow the line on the bed of your machine here. And this machine has 1 inch. It goes all the way to 1.5 inch that's marked out. So those are like large hems, okay, that you might need to do, 3% of the time in your sewing. I could measure and use the edge of my fabric all the way over at a 1.5 inch seam allowance if I needed to, just by what's on the machine. But again, making sure that the measurements here are only accurate if I'm keeping that needle in the center default position, okay? So hopefully that helps. And what I was gonna say is to stitch it out, leave it in where the needle defaults to when you turn on your machine and then go in and measure it. And for me, it's right at 3/8 of an inch at that center needle position, okay? It's like right in between these two. So that's what you can do, and just jot down some notes, put a little sticky note right on the machine. If you have multiple machines, you're gonna need to take multiple notes because again, every machine is slightly different, okay? Hi, Deneen. Deneen says, first time here, saw you on Handy Quilter, awesome. For those of you that missed it, I shared it on my Facebook page today and yesterday. on one of the episodes of Handy Quilter Live, I did an interview with Kim Sandberg, which was super duper fun. We filmed that interview a couple months ago when I was in Utah at the Handy Quilter headquarters. And we've had some really great feedback on that interview. So I hope you guys get a chance to check it out. You can catch it on the Handy Quilter YouTube channel, or if you head over to the Crafty Gemini Facebook page and just scroll down, you'll see the post there. I also included in the email we sent out today to our email newsletter subscribers, okay? All right. Oh, great. Don, I'm glad you're enjoying the information. Hi, Stacy. Okay. Great, great, great. Oh, thank you, Patricia. She says it was a great interview. I saw it today. Awesome. All right. So next question I have here is from Connie. Connie's asking, how do you keep a consistent 1/8 inch seam allowance? I have no marker on my presser foot, she says. All right. So a couple things. One, you're not likely to have a 1/8 inch seam allowance line down here like I was just talking about having guides on the bed of your machine, okay? So I'm going to show you what I do. I'm sure there's some specialty feet. You can probably find some generic feet that you can buy that will fit and your specific machine make and model will accommodate. They're going to be super duper narrow. I mean, 1/8 of an inch is nothing, right? But I'll tell you what I do. Because on this machine, it's like my go-to little workhorse. It's what I use here for WIP Wednesday episodes. I've more recently been just keeping it up here so that I can film the video courses that I do for my clubs and everything. And you will rarely see me change the foot on this. I only go from this one to the zipper foot and back and forth if I'm installing a zipper. That's it. So for me, if you're like me and you want to keep one foot on here most of the time, you just need to figure out where on the foot that you're keeping on your machine you need to be looking at to guide your fabric to get that 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. So for me, and I'm going to give you a little close-up here of the presser foot. So if you have a look, and yours might be different. Some presser feet are all plastic, some are all metal. Mine happens to be half metal, and it has a good bit of plastic right here, clear. You see that? So what I do is if I've moved the needle position over, like I've told y'all already, for my 1/4 of an inch seam allowance, and it's scooted over, okay, I know that then the edge here of my presser foot is going to put me at a 1/4 of an inch, right? Well, 1/8 of an inch is half of that. So I try to split the difference from where the needle comes down and where the edge of the foot is, okay? And it usually ends up right somewhere about where the metal and the plastic meet on that side. And that's just how I do it because, I mean, I sew on this machine almost every single day. So that's what I do. I just do a little bit shy of the full 1/4 inch, and I just keep writing it there. Just look at that guide and go, 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 go. Make sure that it's straight. And that usually will just give you the 1/8 of an inch. Now, if you're doing some type of top stitching and the instructions tell you top stitch 1/8 of an inch down from where the zipper meets the fabric or something on a pouch, it's not that it has to be exactly 1/8 of an inch. You just want to be consistent, right? We usually say 1/8 of an inch because we want it to be a little bit further down. Let me grab one of my pouches right quick. We want it to be a little bit further down so that it secures whatever we're wanting it to secure in place, okay? And so here I use a gray thread so you can see the stitching right here. And so that's about 1/8 of an inch down from where the zipper meets the fabric, right? And so that's all that matters. It doesn't have to be exactly 1/8 of an inch. I just don't want you stitching on top of the zipper, and I don't want you stitching all the way down here. So we say 1/8 of an inch to kind of give you that cue as like, hey, stay close to the top, but you should be on the top fabric, like the main cotton fabric, not on the zipper, or obviously not the zipper teeth, okay? So it's not as important that it be exactly 1/8 of an inch. Just try and split the halfway point of a 1/4 of an inch if you have that down on your machine. Okay, so hope that answers your question, Connie. And then we're moving on to the last question that I have here that was submitted by Lori. Let me make sure I'm not missing anything. Okay, so Lori's asking, what is the best brand for a rotary cutter? I use the Fiskars and they aren't that great. So I'm going to share with you the ones that I have been using forever and a day, especially since I started hosting quilting retreats. I like and love. These are the only ones that I use these days. I've had a ton of them. And the best one is going to depend on what's the best for you. Some people like the little Martelli ergonomic ones. I never got a handle on those. But I would recommend, if you're in the market for a rotary cutter, to maybe check out one of your local fabric stores and see if you can demo, like kind of just try out like how it feels and how you hold it in your hand, the rotary cutter, because that can have a lot to do with it. I'm going to tell you why I like these. These are the ones that we sell in our shop. I don't know if we have any left, but we sell them in a couple different sizes. The 45 millimeter is going to be your typical go-to. If you make kind of smaller pouchy type projects, if you make some quilts, mini quilts, and you're not really making a lot of fleece, bulky type of blankets, the 45 mil is like the go-to for everything, okay? And so I have the most of these. I probably have close to 24 of these rotary cutters because we host retreats. And when you have a retreat or you're in a big room with a lot of quilters, everybody defaults to what they do at home. And so if you live at home, you have your own dedicated sewing room, or you live alone, maybe you have a couple cats, but you don't have little kids or anything like that, this can be very, very dangerous to have one of the other rotary cutters, and I don't have any of them here actually because I've got rid of all of them. Yeah, these are the only ones I have here. The other ones, you can press in a little tab and slide it down so that it exposes the blade. And so what I found quickly after the first retreat was that people would leave the blades open. And so then you have like 30 some people in a room and people are moving their hands and grabbing their rulers and stuff. I mean, you got to be so careful with these blades being exposed, either you swiping it and cutting yourself or it falling on the floor. At a retreat, everybody's comfy in pajamas, barefoot, in sandals. So I went to these because when I press down on the handle here, you can see that the blade comes out. So when you grip it, the blade is exposed. You can cut, but as soon as you let it go, it slides back in. So even when it's not locked, and this little red button locks it, so you can see I just pressed it. If I press here, it's locked. So this is great for putting it in your retreat bag, toting it around to a class, to a retreat. You know that you're not going to mistakenly depress the handle and have that blade be out and exposed. So that's a full lock, okay? But even when it's not locked, if it's like this, if no one's actually pressing on the handle, that blade isn't exposed. So because I had a shop and I taught people and I taught kids and everything in person, these are just the safest ones that I found over the years. And I mean, I'm proud to say we've never had anybody cut themselves. As when we've had these, nobody, not a kid, not a grown-up. So these are my favorite ones. They fit in nicely in my hand. And hold on, there's more. No, I'm right hand dominant, so you see the blade on this side. But if you flip it over, you see that it has the same depression on the other side. So you could put the blade on this side if you were a lefty. Ooh, look at all that lint. Don't judge. I work a lot in here, okay? Let me think. This goes first, then this, then this. Is that right? Nope. That plastic goes here. That's what I get for talking. Ooh, hold on before I cut myself. Like that, then this, then this. And you just screw the little thingy in until it's super secure. There. And so the lefties of y'all would just hold it like this, and you can see that you can cut that way, okay? So these are great because you could just move the blade over to whatever side you need it to be. Okay, so for righties and lefties. So these are my favorites, okay? All right, so that is the last of my questions here. Oh, thank you. Glenda says those are my fave too. They are. They're easy to use. You can, and I feel like this is another thing. On some of the rotary cutters that I used years before, you'll see when I open it from this side, can you see how much of that blade is sticking out? I feel like on some of the older models and stuff, the blade wasn't as out. Like there's a solid 1/4 of an inch there of that blade. And so what I found that would happen to me was that like the blade would be a little bit out. And if I was cutting through multiple layers of fabric, it was like there wasn't enough blade to go down on the side of the ruler for me to feel like I was getting a good cut. So I'd have to do like multiple cuts just because the blade there wasn't enough blade exposed, if that makes sense, to get through and ride along the edge of these 1/8 inch thick rulers. Okay, so these are my besties, my besties. Tracy's asking who's the maker for the cutter. Olfa. Olfa is the maker. And these are called, I think they're 45 millimeter ergonomic rotary cutters because they have a couple different ones. And actually the smaller ones don't have this handle. I have a little one somewhere. Hold on. Here. See, the big ones used to be like this too. This is the little 28 millimeter, sorry. I use this to go around little bitty curves. But see, this is not the one that I'm using all the time. So when it's like this, it's a lot easier to like, okay, you used it for a couple of curves and then slide the blade back up. So that black plastic piece that you see there, it is the safety. I can remove it by pressing down on this and I'm squishing it down like a button and then sliding down. And then there you can see that the blade is exposed, okay? So you can cut and then just press in and go up. Now, the other ones that I started using were this size, but with this type of a handle. It was so funny because in my early years of doing YouTube videos, I got into such a habit. I would cut and literally before I even placed the rotary cutter down, it'd be closed. So I would have people commenting like, that's really dangerous. You shouldn't be putting the rotary cutter down open. And I'm like, if you looked real close, it was never open. Because it was just a habit that you create when you first start, you know? You're like, okay, I'm closing it. I have little bitty kids in my house. I cannot have it be open. So I would do it so quick that I wouldn't even notice. And it was just second nature to close it up. So you can do that and get used to those. Or save yourself the headache and get these that are great for lefties, righties, and they close on themselves because you got to have the handle depressed, okay? And of course, the safety lock. Yes, okay. Oh, Glenda's asking me about this new cutting mat. So I said that I would keep y'all posted. So far, it's working fine. The only thing is, one, I like that it's white because anything that I show on here stands out and it pops for filming the videos. But I don't know how good it's going to hold up because I only use mostly this center area, right? So if I was someone who was using like the long edge of it, because it's about 93 or 94 inches long or something, if I was moving around constantly and cutting in different areas, I think I'll be able to get more use out of it. It's not a self-healing mat. So that's my only concern. That like, how long is it going to take for me to cut way too many times in the same spot to have any issues? But I'll keep y'all posted. So far, I haven't had any issues. And for those that are wondering, this it comes with this big mat scraper so that like any little bits of the material here, if they're raised up from all the cuts, you can just scrape it out and kind of smooth it back down. And this was from bigmatrotarycuttingsurface.com. That's where I ordered it from. It's called a Big Mat Rotary Cutting System. Okay? And they recommend here Olfa blades and everything. So yeah, that's what I've been using. And so far, so good. And if y'all could see what I'm seeing in terms of how many cut lines, I do a lot of cutting. So far, so good. All right. Yes, thank you, Maureen. She says, folks, don't forget to give Vanessa a thumbs up. If you learned anything from today's video, feel free to give the video a thumbs up. You can also share it with your friends on social media sites, on YouTube. You can share it, Facebook, and all that stuff. We definitely would appreciate it. And thank y'all for tuning in this week. I hope you enjoy the rest of your week and weekend. We got holidays and stuff coming up. I'll send out an email this weekend to our newsletter to see whether or not we're going to be able to do another WIP Wednesday for next week. Depends if we're in town or what exactly we're going to be doing. And I will let y'all know about that. But head on over to CraftyGemini.com. You can sign up for our email newsletter list because that is the best way to stay in the loop of all the Crafty Gemini happenings. We tell you any live events that we have going on, retreats that we have for next year, sales, all that kind of stuff. We definitely send out emails with all that information. Okay. Thank you everybody for tuning in this week for WIP Wednesday episode number 75, and I'll see you in the next one.